everyone, and welcome to the Social Contract, a Commander podcast. I'm Mike Almond, and joining me is my co-host, Alex Lapp. Alex, what's up, man?
Well, Mike, we got a new set coming out.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, so, Kaldheim. I'll tell you what, we don't have this written in here, but can you tell me a little bit of the lore of Kaldheim? I mean, there's gods, Thor is in this set,
God.
essentially.
Why would you ask me that? Mike, you completely put me on the spot. I have nothing prepared at all to talk about Kaldheim lore in any way.
I'm messing with you. I was actually not sure. Because I'm like, wait, where the hell are we? How does this work? I know Kaya's here.
Yeah, Kaya's here. Vorinclex is here.
Why is Vorinclex here?
Well, I don't know why Vorinclex is here, dude.
Well,
I simply do not know.
Man, so if this is somebody's first episode, we were doing a really good job showing them how good we
This
are
is
at
not
Magic.
a Magic lore podcast. If you want that, you go Magic Arcanum, something like that.
Exactly. This is where we're going to talk more about the political cards, the group hug cards, the ones that fall into our wheelhouse, and there are some interesting cards going on in this set. I am not sure how I feel about all the cards, but some of them, all right, I'm definitely going to find a spot for these.
Yeah, Mike, this isn't going to be a normal set review, although if you've listened to our previous set review, this may seem a bit familiar. We're not going to be talking about all of the fun new stuff that's interesting to everyone, like every other podcast is doing. We're just going to talk about the stuff that Mike said is in our wheelhouse, the political cards, the group hug cards, the stacks cards, the meme cards. We're not talking about all the new commanders or any of that, so if you want to hear that, I think you can find somewhere to listen to that. Let's go ahead and start.
If you found us, you definitely can find all of that.
Oh, absolutely. Try the command zone.
So let's start off strong with a card that everybody absolutely hates.
They hate this.
Except you. And I'm pretty excited about that. Let's start with Divine Gambit. This is 2 white for a sorcery. Exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment an opponent controls. That player may put a permanent card from their hand onto the battlefield. Strictly awful version of Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, everything along those lines. Why are you in on this card?
Well, Mike, you're absolutely right. This card is completely garbage at removing things from the board. If you want to exile something from the board, you could do a lot better than Divine Gambit. However, if you're trying to give somebody else free stuff and also maybe remove something that might need to be removed, who knows, then you could do a lot worse than 2 mana. Here's the problem. It's sorcery speed.
The sorcery speed kills me.
Yeah, it's sorcery speed. That's the big one. It's sorcery speed. It can't hit anything. Only artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. Mm-hmm. Not land, not planeswalker. Yeah, I mean, it does let your opponent bring something out, but I think even for our taste, it's a little bit too rich for our blood, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we have very limited control over what they put out, and there's also very limited upside for us, the caster of Divine Gambit. It's really a wild card. This is pretty close to like Chaos Warp and Braids combined, and
right,
it's just
in its weird way.
I don't think you're going to be seeing this card in very many decks, and in fact, I'm probably not even going to be running it because it's a sorcery. It just doesn't have enough upside.
No. They just shot themselves in the foot because, again, if this was an instant...
Oh, yeah, I'd run this in a heartbeat.
But people would still hate it, but people like me and you would go,
oh, yeah.
Well, you're interesting.
See, everybody hates this card, Mike, but for different reasons.
Yes.
We hate it because it's a sorcery, and there's not enough upside on it.
Right.
Everyone else hates it because it's a removal spell that lets your opponent show and tell for free.
Right.
Which is, as far as removal spells go, really bad. Mm-hmm. And as far as group hug goes, that's a lot of power, but you can't really control it, and you can't do it very fast. We've said our piece about this card. I wouldn't expect to see it in basically any decks. It's a missed opportunity. Let's go ahead and move on.
Yeah, let's move on to a much better card here, Doomscar. Now, this is 3 generic and white for a sorcery that says destroy all creatures. Okay, that's not a terrible board wipe, but it also has Foretell, and this is going to be a mechanic we talk about several times this episode. For 1 generic and 2 white, During your turn, you may pay 2 generic and exile this card from your hand face down. Cast it on a later turn for its foretell cost. Okay, so I can pay 3 generic and 2 white now, or I can pay 3 generic and 2 white over time to cast a board wipe when I need it at sorcery speed. I like this card, Alex.
Yeah, Mike, this is an interesting board wipe. This falls under the kind of more chilling effect that a Nev's Disc or something of that nature might have. And it's important to note that you do exile this card face down, but you are, of course, allowed to tell people about it, and if you so choose, show them. Now, this card isn't exactly blowing my socks off, because its main use, from where I'm sitting, is an extremely early board wipe, turn 3 board wipe. In many circumstances, a turn 3 board wipe, destroy all creatures, if you're in a bit of a faster meta, maybe an aggro meta, devastating.
Okay.
I mean, think about you're playing this against a deck running Mana Dorks.
Sure.
And they get out like 2 of them, and then they ramp into a bigger guy. They just got reset completely. Like, they're back to ground zero. Here's the problem. If you want to cast it right away, it's 5 mana. If you aren't using the foretell effect, or if you aren't using it well, this spell is terrible. Because for 3 white, you can do a lot better than destroy all creatures, period, no upside.
Sure.
We can talk about Wrath of God. 2 white, destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated, which is less mana with upside. Right. And it came out in alpha. So the crux of this card is the foretell. If you are not planning to run this card as a rattlesnake, like we're talking about with Nev's Disc, chilling effects, that kind of stuff, where you kind of control the board by telling people you're going to wipe it, or you play it extremely aggressively in board wipe turn 3. If you're not doing one of those 2 things, do not run this board wipe, because there are a lot of other board wipes you could run. What do you think, Mike?
So here's my question, and I was going to touch on this later with you, but as part of the foretell mechanic, it says exile it from your hand face down.
Yes.
So with it saying face down, does that mean I can turn it up and show it to people? Like, I can reveal that information without any kind of issue? Or does it have to stay face down?
To my knowledge, you are able to show any information from a hidden zone that's or a private zone, a zone that you are allowed to look at, but other people aren't. So we're not talking about your library,
right,
where you're not allowed to look at it.
Okay.
But you're allowed to show your hand. You're allowed to show your graveyard. You're allowed to show things that are face down if you want to. You also don't have to. You can just say, I'm foretelling Doomscar. This is a board wipe.
Sure.
Even if you're not foretelling it.
Yeah. So if that's the case, I love foretell. I love foretell because I am very rarely going to put myself in a position where I want to hide this card. Because what do we say is the most powerful counterspell? The one that everybody else knows that you have.
It's the rattlesnake.
It's the rattlesnake, exactly.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying as far as there are much more efficient 5 mana board wipes.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you are using it as a rattlesnake, it is effective. It's just when you're not using it like that and you're not board wiping turn 3, then you shouldn't be using it. This is it looks like a generalized board wipe. This is actually a very specific board wipe.
Absolutely. I get where you're coming from. I am really excited with for this card simply just to apply pressure more than anything else, to where it's, hey, I've got a button. That's it.
Mike, we could fill an entire episode with rattlesnakes and just talk and talk and talk. We should.
We're going to have to do that in the future.
Rattlesnake is such an important element of control. Let's go ahead and move on to our next card and our first commander, Redane, God of the Worthy.
Yeah.
For 2 and a white, legendary creature God. She is flying, vigilance, and snowlands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. She also has non-creature spells your opponents cast with converted mana cost 4 or more, cost 2 more to cast. So if it costs 4, it's costing at least 6. I think the most reasonable thing you could compare this to is like Gaddock Teague.
Yeah.
Which is a very classic SAS commander. However, that's not it, because this is a modal double-face card commander, and it has something on the back.
We go on the flippy flip here.
Volkmira Protector Shield for 3 and a white. Legendary artifact. If a source an opponent controls would deal damage to you or a permanent you control, prevent one of that damage. And it also has, whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 1. So we have 4 different stacks options.
Yeah.
2 on each side. There's a lot of different things you can do with this stacks piece. And you just get to pick which one is the most reasonable. Now, most of them individually, they're not exactly stacksing my socks off over here.
No.
But the fact that you had the option to choose between 2 groups of 2 is, it's a little more toolboxy. I would not see myself running this in my stacks deck or any of my stacks decks, but this is the single snow hate card that we were promised.
Yeah.
Snow lands your opponent's control, ETB tapped. Mike, over the coming weeks and months, as people start to incorporate Kaldheim cards into their decks, you're going to see a lot more snow than we're used to. We had a lot of people start to incorporate snow lands in Modern Horizons, but the support in Modern Horizons was very limited compared to this set. One of the set's main themes is snow. We got snow tap lands, we got snow spells, we got snow rituals, we got all sorts of snow stuff. A lot of people are just going to switch out all their basics to snow basics.
For good reason.
This locks them all down.
I don't know. Maybe it's the stacks hatred in me. I just, like you said, it doesn't wow me in any like real strong capacity. If I could see this being really, really good in like a draft setting.
Yeah, this is a limited bomb, I would say. If you draft this.
Yeah. For our sake, I mean, I like the artifact side of it more in the command zone. To just, okay, I'm going to pillow fort. I'm going to make it if you're targeting me, if you're hurting me. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult all the time. But for 4 mana, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting, though. I kind of like the direction. I just wish that they either took it a little bit farther or they did something a little bit more creative with it. And I'm saying that about a card that is literally an artifact commander on one side versus the other.
Isn't that just the story of White? Is I wish they had made it stronger and I wish it was more interesting.
Yeah, and now I'm sad enough that we're going to move off White entirely. You tried, buddy. You tried. You didn't do very well, but you tried. Let's move on to blue with Icebreaker Kraken. And you said this earlier. Can you even call it a set of Magic if there's not a 10 blue mana cost card in it at this point? This is an 8/8 snow creature, Kraken. This spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each snow land you control. Well, that's pretty ridiculous. When Icebreaker Kraken enters the battlefield, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls don't untap during that player's next untap step. It has the ability return 3 snow lands you control to their owner's hand, returned Icebreaker Kraken to its owner's hand. Decent amount of stuff going on in this card, Alex.
Absolutely, Mike. This harkens back to the old days of blue. Not the part of the old days where blue is allowed to like have burn spells and ramp spells and things like that.
Do everything in some way, shape, and form.
But the old days of blue where they had like really, really beefy fatties at the high end. And I don't know if you remember this, but they were all terrible. Because Wizards had no idea how to balance creatures on the top end. So you would get cards like Leviathan and other just enormous blue creature spells that were super expensive. And then they had like 7 downsides on them. Absolutely. You had to like pay mana to keep them untapped and on the field. It was terrible.
If you attack, sacrifice several lands, etc., etc., etc.
No, they were awful. So this is like that, but if it were printed today, which it was. So we got 3 effects. Number 1 is it can cost all the way down to blue if you have 10 snow lands, which is great. And then we also have the protection bounce effect, where you can bounce 3 snow lands to your hand and then bounce this creature. And then presumably, depending on how many lands you have ramped out, play it again for 2 mana. It's pretty nasty. Then the main piece, and the reason why we're talking about it today, when Icebreaker Kraken ETBs, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls don't untap during that player's next untap step. So we know how brutal that is. When you lock down somebody's board, now this doesn't lock them out completely. They get their lands, but they're not attacking, and they're not getting any big plays in with their mana rocks. it's gonna host somebody pretty bad. If you have infinite mana, this is a fantastic one because you can just keep bouncing it and playing it again, and then all of your opponents are locked out. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting card. I'm not saying that I'm going to be running it, but it's a stacks piece, it's a political piece, an enormous 10 blue 80.
Yeah.
So we had to talk about it, right?
The thing is if you're building your deck right and this is in it, this is never going to be 10 blue, right? It's never.
Never.
I like ETB creatures. I like creatures that say, hey, if you're playing a blink deck or a bounce deck, this is going to be a lot of fun for you to do.
Oh, yeah. If you blink
this, and you have the ability to also just return it to your hand, tap the lands that you're... It's not even 3 untapped snow lands. So you can... It's
3 snow lands that you tap to play this card. And then if you're in
Simic, maybe in my head, the magical Christmas land is play this for 2 blue. Then tap 3 snow lands for 3 blue mana, bounce this back to your hand, play it again for, another 4 instead, or something along those lines. Just, all right, I'm going to lock down these 2 players. And the idea of this being a finisher when you get to a one-on-one setting in the game, it's an interesting card. I like it. Plus, it's a Kraken. It's an 8/8 Kraken. That's always fun.
Yeah, I mean, the thing on the ice pickle combo, I forget exactly how it works, but it primarily works by locking people out, and this is quite reminiscent of that. I'm sure more competitive players know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about. Let's move on to a much more interesting one, shall we? Mystic Reflection.
This might be my favorite card of the set. I'm not sure yet, but I'm a big fan. Why don't you read it out to us?
Once again, blue gets just the most shenanigans, open-ended, like, wherever your imagination takes you, you can do it. 1 and a blue for an instant. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time 1 or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creature instead. And it has foretell for blue. Oh, wow. So this is costed like a counterspell, and it acts like it too. It's the kind of card that replaces a counterspell because it can be even more devastating than a counterspell. You can use this, I mean, think about all the ways you can use this. You can, when you're making a bunch of tokens, you can make those all into the biggest thing on the board. Mm-hmm. If you are just putting a normal creature in, you can make that another copy of the scariest thing you have. If somebody is reanimating their graveyard, well, now everything that just came out of their graveyard is a copy of a token. If somebody's just playing a planeswalker, you can say in response, that planeswalker is going to be this token creature. It's not a planeswalker, it's a creature now. And the fact that you can foretell it, which means you'll pay 2 generic, and then on a later turn, and since it's an instant, you can cast it at instant speed for 1 blue mana. Mike, what do you think? Shenanigans.
I love anytime a card says, this is a boon to you in a ridiculous sense, or it is a blowout to an enemy in a ridiculous sense.
Yeah.
And this card says, hey, do this for 2 or 2 and then 1 blue mana later. Like, this is...
It's aggressively costed.
This is one of the more insane cards I've seen as far as, like, it's powerful. Don't get me wrong. But the amount of variance and adaptability and just the amount of different things you can do.
It's a very blue card.
Oh my gosh, it's so nuts. Like,
you know what this reminds me of is sudden substitution.
Yeah. I could see that. I mean, there's the idea of, I play an Avenger of Zendikar and I'm gonna make 7 plant tokens, but instead,
which are all Avengers of Zendikar.
I'm gonna make,
and now you get 7 squared 49 plant tokens.
And just so stuff like that seems silly, right?
Any creature that ETBs and makes tokens, this just right off the chart.
It's just nuts.
Yeah.
And, so here's the silly thing. You know what my first thought when this one wasn't Avenger of Zendikar, it was me wanting to do this with Feldegriff.
It's non-legendary.
I'm not talking about doing it to Feldergriff in particular. I'm talking about giving somebody a hippo.
You give them a hippo, and then they reanimate their entire graveyard, which is now all hippos.
It's all hippos.
Right. Crap! It's all hippos.
Oops, all hippos.
Great card.
I actually think that Mystic Reflection, I'm going to start calling it Oops, all blank. Whatever it is, it's just Oops, all this.
Yeah.
This is a nuts card. I love it.
Fantastic.
I also don't want to stop talking about it because we're going to move on to a card that just makes me sad. Especially after we talked about Divine Gambit earlier.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Raven form. 2 generic and a blue for a sorcery. Exile target artifact or creature. Its controller creates a 1/1 blue bird creature token with flying, and it has Foretell for a blue. So you can pay 2 generic on your turn, exile it, put it down, and then you can foretell it for a blue later. So this is, I don't know, would you call it 70% Pongify Rabbit hybrid?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Is this is blue spot removal, Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, Reality Shift. This is just me. I don't think blue should get to do that.
Nope.
Because blue already has unconditional removal in the form of a counterspell, as long as you get it before they cast it or before they get it on the field. And then in addition to that, it also has bounce effects, return to hand, which is not as good of removal as some other forms, but it's usually coming at a lower cost.
Yeah, blue can now. Well, I mean, it can't now because it's been able to do it.
It's already been able to do this.
But it can stop a spell from happening. It can bounce a creature. It can destroy a creature. It can exile a creature. And here's the thing. Not to get on the mono white needs help. White in general needs help. Pulpit and everything like that.
Oh, I'm here for it.
Divine Gambit is 2 white, and it's an uncommon.
Yeah.
For something that is way, way worse.
Then this is a common.
Than this common. That's all you need to say. This is common in blue.
Oh, no.
The worst.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, no.
The fact that it's common isn't the worst part. The worst part is that it's an exile spot removal.
Yeah.
Which really isn't something that need to be giving colors like blue.
I'm trying to think in my head what kind of hand I'd have to not foretell this on turn 2. Like, just having a 1 mana exile a creature or artifact sitting and being ready at it just this is one of those commons that I'm like, I'm going to have to figure out what is coming out of several decks to put this in, because that's a really cool effect. This is powerful, and it's in here because, hey, it's another color pie breaking thing, which I guess it's not even breaking the color pie now. This is just what blue does. But holy cow, man. I can't believe that.
That's what we have for blue for now, and we'll get back to some of that because we're going to do the commander deck precon cards last.
Yep.
So for now, let's go ahead and move on to black.
Yeah. So, oh boy. Okay, so let's talk about Tigrid, God of Fright. 3 generic, black, for a legendary creature god 4/5 with menace. And says, whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That is nuts and terrifying. At the same time, for 3 generic and a black, because it is a modal double face card, you can play Turgid's? Wow. Turgid's Lantern. This is 3 generic and a black legendary artifact. Tap it. Target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And for 3 generic and a black, you can untap Turgid's Lantern. The artifact is pretty interesting. I like it a lot. But holy cow, this is I don't like this creature, Alex. I don't like it. What the heck is this?
Yeah, Mike, let's talk about each half separately because these are very different.
Let's start with the legendary artifact then, because I feel like I'm going to have a lot more to say on the god than I am the lantern.
So again, the legendary artifact has tap Torments of Hellfire.
Yeah.
And then you can pay 4 mana, 3 and a black to untap it, which you can then tap it again. So this is an infinite mana outlet. This is a win con for decks that can generate infinite black mana.
Yep.
And yeah, as soon as you have infinite black mana, every player is dead because they're going to run out of permanents to sacrifice,
Yep.
they're going to run out of cards to discard, and then they're going to have all of their life drained. Big payoff card right there. If you're not doing that, it's mostly like super annoying.
Yeah, because it is obnoxious. It is annoying. You're right, but at the same time, 3 life. Like, if it's really that bad, okay, it's 3 life. You know?
Well, you put this in a deck that cares about opponents losing life,
Right.
and cares about opponents sacrificing creatures and discarding cards. There are a lot of black decks that like when players do those things. So this is just generic value there, and I think they might run it. And in those decks, voila, you have another win con as long as you can make infinite mana.
Right.
When it's not being used as a win con, yeah, it's just tedious. I mean, it gives the players the bad choice.
Sure.
You either discard a card, sack a non-land permanent, or lose 3 life. You're going to lose 3 life until you can't afford to lose anymore.
Sure. I mean, at the same time, I mean, yeah, great. For 8 mana, I can do this effect 3 times in a turn. Okay.
Well, yeah, don't think about it that way.
Yeah, that's not it.
If you're doing it more than once in a turn, you're going infinite.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I hope. Let's talk about the front side.
Yeah.
So I'll read that one more time. Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, which is a card that would be a permanent when it resolves, you may put that card onto the battlefield under your control. So, Mike, the one that this reminds me of is It That Betrays.
Yeah.
Which is an Eldrazi. And when you're comparing anything to an Eldrazi, you know there's trouble. It's an Eldrazi for 12 with Annihilator 2. And this same clause, except it doesn't have the discard part of the clause in it.
Yeah.
So from where I'm sitting, if you don't care about Annihilator, which now Annihilator's really good, but
yeah.
it's not 12 mana good.
Right.
You're getting a better version of a 12 CMC effect on a 5 CMC body.
Sure.
Which, wow. Like, this is the only time other than It That Betrays that we've ever seen this, and it's at a 7 mana discount. This is so aggressively powerful.
And there's so many effects in black that make people sacrifice
edicts
and discard things, and
yeah.
All of that sounds well and good. This is, well, first of all, if anybody in your play group is playing wheels, no, they're not. Never again. Like that kind of this is one of those things.
You discard your hand, they get everything in your hand that can be on the battlefield.
This is so gross. Like this is. I don't know that it's necessarily a remove on sight commander when you see it the first time, but this is a. Hear me out. How many times does this have to do something terrifying before you go, okay, this can never happen again?
Here's the problem, Mike, because after this comes out, the next spell is going to be All Is Dust.
Right.
Then they're the only one with a board, and everything on their board is from your board.
Yep.
So you lose, but that's not the only effect they can use. They can use any edict effect, and in black, there are a lot of them. An edict effect is whenever you sacrifice something, everyone else sacrifices something, or you can simply force everyone to sacrifice something.
Am I crazy to think that Tergrid, God of Fright, is just a black Eldrazi commander at this point? Like, that deck can work pretty well.
And she's very scary.
It's just, it's edicts and...
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing Annihilator Tribal, this is probably the best commander you could have. But most people are going to be playing this as Edict Tribal.
Sure.
Aristocrats.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Tergrid
this is a very nasty, nasty card.
I don't know that it's a bomb, but it is absolutely nasty.
I wouldn't call it because you have to build the deck around it.
Right.
This has to be your deck's theme. But when it's your deck's theme, this is the best card in your deck.
Yeah.
Because now all that stuff you're making people sacrifice is now your stuff.
Well, I mean, so Alex, we've talked about my Vivictus deck before.
Yeah.
We've talked about like the fact that I have a Marin deck that I don't bring out because it makes me feel like a bad person. And just sitting here going, oh, I probably need to put this in one of those if I get one. Oh, Turgrid. Woe is me. Let's go ahead and move on. Why don't you talk to me about our next legendary creature here?
Yeah, you got it, Mike. So next we have Varagoth, Bloodsky's Sire. Just 2 and a black for a legendary creature Demon Rogue for 2/3 with Death Touch. And a new ability, Boast. For 1 and a black, activated ability. Target player searches their library for a card, then shuffles their library and puts that card on top of it. Activate this ability only if this creature attacked this turn and only once each turn. So basically everybody who's not us looks at this card and sees, oh, it's a commander that, provided I can protect it during combat, will just keep tutoring out cards for me at a really, really aggressive rate.
And the Death Touch does help with that, too.
It does, because people don't want to block this. And the scarier you make it, the less they'll want to block it. So yeah, most people are going to be just tutoring for themselves. What's the good one? Vampire Tutor?
Yeah.
Although this puts it on top of your library. For me, this is just such a lovely political piece, because you can attack somebody with this. It's only 2 damage. And then pay 2 mana. Say, hey, you see all that stuff going on over there? Get your answer for it, and it only costs you 2.
You know what I think Varagoth needs to get?
What's that?
That boy needs himself an assault suit.
I thought you were going to say that boy needs himself an opposition agent.
No, why would I ever say that? How dare you?
Well, probably because if you have opposition agent out when you have Varagoth out, it's 2 mana, you search target player's library for any card, and you exile it. You don't put it on top.
You don't put it on top. You exile it,
and then you can play it from exile.
Yeah, no, I know that exists, but I don't acknowledge its existence.
I thought it was worth bringing up just to remind everyone about how ridiculously broken Opposition Agent is. Yeah.
This has been your friendly reminder. Opposition
Fantastic.
Agent still messed up.
Let's move on.
Let's go ahead to red here with I'm so happy. Let's talk more color pie. What's that? Default's Trickery. 1 generic and a red for an instant. Counter target spell, a very common red effect. Then choose 1, 2, or 3 at random. Its controller mills that many cards, then exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card with a different name than that spell. They may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put the exiled cards on the bottom of their library in a random order. It's counter warp.
Yeah, it's counter warp.
This is cool.
It's costed like counter warp too.
It is. Ah!
Usually red can counterspell, but only very specific kinds of spells. They can counter blue spells. That's what they're allowed to counter. But this says counter target spell, period.
Right.
An unconditional counterspell. Mike, white doesn't even get unconditional counterspells. Why does red get an unconditional counterspell?
There's hold on. There's 1 white counterspell I can. Is it Lapse of Certainty that says?
Lapse of Certainty is the only unconditional one.
Okay, so there's 1, and it just says put that back on top. So it's not even. Yeah. It's a duo.
They still get to have it,
right?
And it costs 3 mana, and it's the only white counterspell that is unconditional. So let's talk about this effect. So it's going to mill between 1 and 3 cards off the top of that spell's controller's library, and then they're going to basically cascade until they hit a spell, a non-land card.
Yep.
That isn't the one you just countered. The first thing that a lot of people thought was, I'm going to use this on myself and do like a Hermit Druid kind of combo and just win the game, because the only other spell in my deck is, Bloodsteel Colossus.
Sure.
Something like that. And Eldrazi. And that's definitely a valid way to play it.
I guess.
But the fact of the matter is that if you're countering someone's spell, I mean, we had Dana on recently, and he offhandedly mentioned that Arcane Denial wasn't a group hug counterspell. And on that point, I think I'll disagree, because obviously a counterspell can't really be group hug, but as far as the spirit of group hug in a counterspell,
sure.
Arcane Denial, Swan Song, Tybalt's Trickery,
okay,
these are all things that I would say are political counterspells.
I'm just sitting here thinking about doing this to the player that literally just did the Varagoth trigger and put something on top of their library. And it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm going to mill something.
Yeah, I mean, if you see somebody tutor something at the top of their library, you can just screw them.
It's
Psychic
interesting.
surgery.
Right. It's interesting in that effect. I don't love chaos without some kind of intent. This is a really cool card.
Oh, yeah.
It's not nearly as narrow or have the negatives of what I would consider all of the other red counter spells to have.
Yeah, any red deck that's running Chaos Warp, you could probably run this one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
And every red deck can run Chaos Warp.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, here you go. You heard it from Alex. Every deck can get a Tibalt's Trickery without any kind of issue.
If you're in a red deck that cares about control at all, it's probably worth a slot.
Let's get off of red. Let's leave Tibalt alone and go to Sculptor of Winter. This is 1 generic and a green for a snow creature, Elf Rogue. It's a 2/2, and it has the ability untap target snowland. Pretty straightforward. Pretty nice. Why are we talking about this, Alex?
Well, I'll tell you why we're not talking about it, and that's the fact that her ears are braided.
That's so weird!
Yeah, she has like some braided filigree elf ears. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I can't look away from it.
And the fact that the braid goes into like her cheeks and then like her forehead and everything, like, it's a full-fledged thing. But it's also kind of unsettling at the same time.
I happen to know offhand, Mike, don't ask me why, that braiding skin is not possible. You can do it, but the skin will necrose and die. So we're not really going to talk about that. But we will talk about her ability, untap target snowland. Now, Arbor Elf, very similar creature for a green, untap target land, or untap target forest. Of course, it's ramp. It's also my favorite, which is mana donation. You're going to start seeing, as I said earlier, a lot more players running snowlands incidentally. Because unless you're running Verdane, which nobody is, snow is nothing but upside. There's no reason not to do it, other than the expense. So it's a common, so it's not exactly aggressively costed for 1 and a green. But you know what? It's worth mentioning because you can use this to donate 1 mana, and I just think that's fantastic.
So you covered it pretty well. I don't have anything to add. Are you really wanting to, like, do you think that I'm just supposed to skip the whole you talking about you can't braid somebody's skin thing?
You can't braid somebody's skin, Mike. You understand you can't have a layer of skin.
I understand the premise of what you're saying. I'm more concerned with the uncertainty and the...
You can't do it. All right, we're going to take a quick break and then come back and talk about the multicolor cards in this set.
Be right back.
Hey, it's Present Mike filling in for Past Mike. Our audio has gotten so much better. Thanks for sticking around with us. So we're going to talk about some cards that are really underplayed. We each think that we're bringing some really interesting cards to the table, and if you want to grab them or any other cards, you can help us out in the process. We have partnered with TCGplayer.com, so if you're looking for any singles, sealed product, deck boxes, sleeves, playmats, really anything to spice up your game experience, go to bit.ly/EDHsocial or click on the link in our show notes. You don't pay anything extra, and you'll really help us out by buying all the things you were going to anyway. That's bit.ly/EDHsocial or click the link in our show notes. Back to the show.
Carter, Doomscourge. This is 2 generic for a black-red Demon
Carter
Berserker.
braids his skin.
Oh, God. For a Demon Berserker 4/3, when Carter Doomscourger enters the battlefield until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat, if able, and attack a player other than you, if able. Whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. This is pretty neat. So this is when it comes onto the battlefield, goad all creatures, and when they die... Oh, wow, this is kind of a neat effect. I misread this the first time, Alex.
Yeah, Mike, for an uncommon, this has a surprising amount of value, political value as well. And it's interesting that they didn't use goad, probably because goad's not an evergreen keyword.
Yeah.
But it is goad. We've talked about this in a previous episode, but if you need a refresher, goad has 2 clauses. The first one is the creature must attack each combat if able, and it must attack a player, besides you if able. So if it can't attack anyone but it can attack you, then that's allowed.
Right.
Not too much else to say about that. You can listen to the other episode if you want to hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Master Warcraft in the Commander Legends review.
Yes, we
but,
did.
Mike, this is just a lot of just very nice value. Black and red in Rakdos, I think, would really appreciate this sort of thing. I think that it's not a phenomenal amount of value. Like, it doesn't have wedded ETBs or attacks. If it had that, then we really might, be cooking with something here.
Then this is a either much more expensive card, or it's a holy cow. This thing has got some spice to it.
So if you have a way to like just consistently sack and reanimate it, you're keeping everyone else's creatures completely tapped down, and then you can just go in with aggro, no problem. And then you're getting a lot of life gain triggers and triggering a lot of life loss triggers. If your deck cares about that, this is a phenomenal way to do it. It's just a lot of value for an uncommon commander. This is one of the best uncommon commanders I've ever seen.
Wow. Okay. See, I'm sitting here thinking that I don't know that I'm ever playing this deck as the commander itself, because the amount of recursion that I'd have to get out of it.
Yeah, you need a full package.
Right. But, I mean, I've wanted to make a Thantis the Warweaver deck, and
this will go in there.
This loves going in there.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, goat effects, but not goat effects. But they're goat effects.
That's the other side, is this is great for a budget deck because uncommon cards are pennies.
Yep.
So
I mean, heck,
look at
the budget card Divine Gambit. It's only 25 cents right. And moving on.
Yeah.
I'm still bitter.
Mike, that would be 25 cents if it were a mythic, let's be honest.
Yeah, I know. Let's move on to a mythic that is definitely not 25 cents.
Kaya the Inexorable. For 3 white-black, Legendary Planeswalker Kaya, of course. Starting loyalty of 5. Let's go ahead and work through her abilities here.
Yeah.
Her +1 says, put a ghost form counter on up to 1 target non-token creature. It gains, when this creature dies or is put into exile, return it to its owner's hand and create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. We're going to loop back to that one because that's the one I want to talk about. Next one, -3, exile target non-land permanent. That's good value. That's Ugin has that ability, so you know it's good. -7. You get an emblem with, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a legendary spell from your hand, from your graveyard, or from among cards you own in exile without paying its mana cost. You know what? That's pretty nice.
Whoa.
But, of course, it's an ultimate.
Yeah.
And typically when we're talking about Planeswalkers, we don't really want to talk about their ultimates unless we can get there real fast, or it's so good that you instantly win the game.
Right. That's fair.
So right now I want to focus on her +1, which is Kaya's Ghost Form. Is a card that just recently got printed a year or two ago in War, I believe.
I think so.
And it had basically this exact effect minus the afterlife, where it was an instant that said whenever this target creature dies or is exiled, return it to the battlefield. This instead returns it to hand.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really nice is the counter has given the creature this ability. So even after Kaya goes away, if she indeed goes away, loses all her loyalty, is destroyed, the creatures with ghost form counters on them will still have that effect. When this creature dies or is exiled, bounce it to hand, make a 1/1 with flying. And its controller is the one making the 1/1 with flying. So, Mike, I think this is just a very nice, let's make your creature immortal. We're going to just let you have it if it gets wiped. How about your commander? If somebody tries to exile your commander, we'll just let it go to your hand instead. You can do it to your own stuff. You can do it to your opponent's stuff. It's not a phenomenal amount of value, but for a +1, it's pretty damn good.
It is. And the thing is that if you told me that was a -1 ability for most Planeswalkers,
I wouldn't be surprised.
It wouldn't be, because it's value. It's
a lot of value on a +1.
And so if the downside of this card is that it's going to exile a permanent because you just don't have another source to do so, but the Planeswalker is still going to stick around for a little bit, that's not bad.
Yeah.
You mentioned we don't talk about Planeswalker ults unless, there's a way to get to it really fast or that it's win the game kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can get to this pretty fast. I mean,
you can, but let's do the counting, shall we? So you'll put it down as 5 mana. You'll +1 her. Then she's at 6.
Correct.
Next turn 6, +1 her, she's at 7.
Mm-hmm.
Next turn 7, you -7 and she's gone.
Right.
So you're going from turn 5 to turn 7 without her taking any damage. Now, it's definitely possible, especially in more casual metas, but I would find that in most metas, if you're being honest, and we talked about this in a previous episode, you need to make other people aware at the table when your Planeswalker is going to ult next turn.
Right.
And that's not a rules thing. You don't technically need to. I'm telling you that you need to from a nice person standpoint, from a having fun with the game standpoint.
People enjoying
You're not sabotaging yourself. You're preventing a feel bad situation. So, given that, we're going to pretend that everyone has perfect information and knows that it's going to take you 2 full turns to take care of her.
True. It takes more time than you'd like to get to an ult if that's the goal, which I totally understand. In the meantime, when something is dying to protect Kaya from going away or taking damage, it's replacing itself with a 1/1 white spirit with flying.
That's true, it is.
So, I mean, it's not that I expect this to ult. It's that the amount of times that I expect it to ult versus other cards, I think this is going to be a little bit more consistent, and I like the idea of it not being absolutely game-breaking if you get that ult. It's scary, don't get me wrong, and anytime you can say, I want to cast something for free, but I like the ability of, I think I just like Kaya in general. The fact that it's manipulating things through exile, and I'm a big fan of this Planeswalker, because there's not an ability on here that I go, well, that's just dumb, you know?
Yeah. No, Kaya's definitely proved a formidable new Planeswalker in the past few years here.
I'm a big fan.
Let's go ahead and move on to our next commander.
Yeah. This is Koma. Cosmos Serpent. 3 generic, 2 green, 2 blue for a legendary creature Serpent. It is a 6/6 that says this spell can't be countered. It's always a good start. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue Serpent creature token named Koma's Coil. The alliteration is going to destroy me on this card. With an additional ability, sacrifice another Serpent. Choose one. Either A, tap target permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. Or Koma, Cosmos Serpent, gains indestructible until end of turn. There's a lot going on with this one, Alex.
Absolutely, Mike. This is the amount of value that you expect from a Simic commander, but it's not the type of value that you would usually expect. I think that when you think about a Simic commander, that costs 7 mana.
Yeah.
3 double green, double blue. I'm thinking of cards that get you a ton of draw, a ton of ramp, or just so oppressive, completely dominate the board when they hit the field. Now, this is strong.
Oh, very.
But it goes in a bit of a different direction because this is more of a token/stacks commander. And I like that. So let's talk about the first ability, right? So the spell can't be countered. We've seen this before on a commander. We saw it on Niv Mizzet Perun. This seems to be a clause that just makes you more comfortable with casting an extremely mana-intensive commander. Green is starting to can't get countered all day, every day.
Yeah.
We all saw the
Allosaurus Shepherd.
Green is getting can't be countered all over the place, and the fact that it pairs with blue, which can counter stuff, is so dangerous. But let's go on to the triggered ability. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 token.
Each Alex!
Upkeep. That's each player's upkeep.
That's so many little snake boys.
In a pot of 4, you get 4 each turn. Tendershoot Dryad, anyone? I love Tendershoot Dryad. That's one of my favorite cards.
It's a good card.
Whenever I see at the beginning of each upkeep make a token, I am immediately happy because the value is right where I want it. Every single turn, you're making a token. And it's not just a 3/3 token. because you specifically have a sack outlet on the commander that allows you to do one of two things. Number two, you can make the commander indestructible.
Yep.
Which is just a nice thing to have. This is a dangerous commander. It's going to draw spot removal. And when it does, or when it would, you have a rattlesnake say, hey, I have at least one token, which means it's going to be indestructible.
Right.
And as we talk about rattlesnakes, the fact that you can do it means you often don't have to. And that'll just continue on. But let's talk about the first option. Tap target permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. That includes lands. Mike.
Yeah, I'm real excited to get a serpent token at the beginning of another player's upkeep and immediately sack it to tap somebody's Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
This is... I mean, there are a lot of token doublers in green, and they just keep adding more. Mm-hmm. And blue has quite a few token generators and payoffs. Green and blue is just great at tokens. You know, that used to be White's thing, but now it's not anymore. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine you're getting 2, 3, 4 per turn, and then every turn you're able to basically completely lock somebody out of the 2 to 4 most important things that they have, or you just let it run for a while, build it up, and then choose one player. They get the snake, they get the fangs, and every single one of their permanents is locked down.
So, you know, when we kind of poo-pooed a little bit on the salamander card, because the salamander commander, because how many salamanders
Thor,
are there
Moldrick,
really?
The salamander prince.
There's so many. There's a decent amount of serpents in blue. Like,
are you sure that you're seeing the correct number, Mike?
I'm not saying a number. I am just saying.
That's true, Mike. So it doesn't say sacrifice Koma's coil. It says sacrifice another serpent. So any serpent permanent with that type, you can sack it to this. So serpent tribal, there you go.
Go for it, man. It's here now. Oh man, Alex, this is
a serpent just a water snake? What is a serpent?
I don't know. You know what?
Like a snake sea monster?
We're going to take a quick pause because I'm curious about this now.
The flavor of this, and you can see it a little bit better if you're looking at the art, it's just an enormous leviathan of a snake with its coils going all the way off the art of the card, underneath the water, up into the air, and into the sky. It's a snake that's unfathomably long. And each upkeep, it's getting longer. It's getting an additional coil, right, on the snake. You ever played the game Snake on your old Nokia phone? Mm-hmm. Depending on how old you are. It just keeps getting longer, and that's what this snake is doing.
So, I've unfortunately gone down the Google rabbit hole to try and figure out what's the difference between a serpent and a snake.
Lord.
And there's a couple of, like, Reddit answers and Yahoo answers, but most of the things that aren't affiliated with sites like that are talking about lots of religious connotations. So I'm just going to backpedal extremely quickly into our next commander here. Why don't you talk to me about Saruf?
Yeah, so this is probably the scariest card to get printed this set. Let's talk about
It's a good boy!
Saruf, Realm Eater. It's a wolf for 1 black-green. It's a 3/3 legendary creature. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Saruf, Realm Eater. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if Saruf has 1 or more +1/+1 counters on it, you may remove all of them. If you do, exile each other non-land permanent with CMC less than or equal to the number of counters removed this way. All right, that was a lot of information. So let's summarize that. Whenever anything goes to the graveyard from the battlefield, put a counter on the wolf.
Yep.
When your turn starts at the beginning of your upkeep, if that has happened at all since your last turn, if anything has gone to the graveyard from the battlefield, or if you just decided to put some 1/1 counters on it, you can do that. Green's great at it. Yeah, so then you get an optional trigger, which is why we're talking about it. If it was a mandatory effect, wouldn't be here today.
No.
If it has one or more counters on it, you can then choose to remove them all. If you do, whatever that number is, you're going to exile every non-land permanent, except for Sarolf, with a CMC that's equal to that amount or less. So let's say you have 5 on there. You're going to exile all non-land permanents CMC 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0, except Sarolf. That is so devastating. I can't even begin. This is the definition of kill on sight, Mike. Talk to me about Sarolf.
So this is pretty interesting as a card overall. I'm in the it's kill on sight because holy cow, that's a walking board wipe all the time. That's nuts. Also, and on the lighter note, I think of it as a coercive portal in that I'm going to take votes. I'm going to be like, hey.
This is a lot meaner than coercive.
Oh, it definitely is. But in my head, the way that I want this to work is, all right, how worried are we about the board right now? And taking that straw poll from everybody of, do we want to wipe the board? No? Yeah? Huh?
That's the thing. With a card like this, you really do have to control the narrative.
Right.
Because if you were to poll the table and they were to give their thoughts freely, the answer would probably be, well, I'm not too afraid of the board, but I'm really afraid of that wolf that keeps exiling my whole board.
That big doggo.
Yeah. So this is the kind of card where if you want to take that political angle with it, you really need to consider which angle you're taking. Are you taking the mean rude boy angle where you're just dominating the board and exiling everything that you don't like? Or are you taking Mike's coercive angle where at the beginning of each of your turns you're going to hold a vote and decide whether or not the whole board's going to get exiled? Or are you playing this more political angle where you're going to choose, based on whatever whims you may have, whether or not you're going to exile everything? Maybe you'll make a deal. Who knows? There are a lot of ways you can play this card because the board wipe is optional.
Right. So help me out. How does the mean deck play this? Because the way that you're getting counters onto this creature is by permanence, your opponent's control, going from the battlefield to the actual graveyard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can give it +1 counters in the green way that you normally would, but if you're removing stuff, if you're wiping, maybe not wiping the board, but if you're spot removing the board, if you're making people sacrifice things, you're already targeting stuff to remove things from the battlefield to turn this creature into a better board wipe down the road. So how does I know we don't normally do this, but I'm curious, how does this get built?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very big question because you can really build it any way you want. If you wanted to build it in the rude boy way, it's as you said, you would have a primary focus on generating +1/+1 counters and getting them onto Sarolf. And at that point, you would basically just let Sarolf sit there with a full protection package, by the way. You need everything.
Sure.
You need... Kai's Ghost Form's a good one.
That's a really good one.
Yeah. Any of the black effects that'll reanimate your commander, green effects that'll protect your commander. You're going to need like 15 or 20 of those effects. Just be real here, because every other player is going to try to remove it.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a full package of those. You're going to have a full package of getting +1/+1 counters on it, and you're just going to load it up with counters. Maybe get like 10 of them on there, and you just sit there. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to make the call if you want to literally reset the game every one of your turns.
He's such a good boy. I don't want him to be bad.
Sarolf is an angry doggo.
It's not his fault that he eats the realms.
Is he hungry?
I mean, it's in his name. I don't know what to tell you.
That is a scary doggo.
If somebody would give him something delicious to eat, maybe he wouldn't eat the entire battlefield.
I mean, he's got the glowing red eyes, Mike. It's so dangerous.
That's just so he can see. Look at his paws. Look at the paws.
He's as tall as the trees.
Look at the paws and their rainbowy...
in the blood of his victims.
I don't know whose rainbowy blood you're talking about, because I think that he just
unicorns.
I just think he just looks beautiful. Let's move on to the Trickster God's Heist. This is an enchantment saga for 2 generic blue, black. First lore counter, you may exchange control of 2 target creatures. That's spicy. Second, you may exchange control of 2 target non-basic, non-creature permanents that share a card type. And third, target player loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. That's just, I love this roller coaster that we were going up. Oh, look at this climb. We're going to exchange creatures. We love doing that. Oh, we're going to exchange non-basic, non-creature permanents that share a card type. Okay, cool. Target player loses 3 life, you gain 3 life. Really? That's how it's going to end?
It's funny, Mike, I'm not actually bothered by that last one because sagas, like Planeswalkers, tend to have a weakness in Commander because so many opportunities happen as the turns pass.
I know.
For removal. And that means that in the course of 3 turns, in a pot of 4, there will be many opportunities to remove this. And as such, the final ability, Chapter 3, being so lackluster is not really that big of a concern. Because it seems to me that if people were scared enough to remove this, they would want to remove it earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And then as it gets later, it becomes less desirable to remove.
And don't get me wrong, I get that. Like, I understand front-loading it.
Yeah.
But the interest and the drop-off
from
chapters 1 and 2.
Chapter 3 is nothing.
Even in a standard format, like, really? Is that... I don't know where this is good, except for in a... Oh, man. It's okay. It's okay. I like switching stuff up, and the political uses of this card.
Chairs deck.
Oh, so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that it's a story spotlight, considering there's no flavor text.
Yeah.
So I guess you just kind of got to look at the pretty scroll.
It's a good saga, as far as sagas are concerned.
I like the idea of exchanging control of permanents.
I do
know
too.
Me, I used to have a Zedru deck. Blim definitely caught my eye, the comedic genius. Exchanging control of permanents is just a very interesting way for a deck to go.
Yep.
And this card enables it. So let's go ahead and look at our artifact here.
Yeah, let's move on to Weathered Runestone. This is 2 generic for an artifact. Non-land permanent cards in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries. So this is just... The other alternate name for this card is just nope.
The alternate name for this card is Grafdigger's Cage ++.
Yep.
Right. So we've seen players can't cast spells from graveyards or libraries.
Yes.
We've seen creatures in graveyards and libraries can't ETB. But now we're seeing non-land permanent cards in graveyards and libraries can't ETB. That means that anything you tutor onto the battlefield, that's a nope. Anything you reanimate from the graveyard, that's a nope. And you cannot cast any spell from a graveyard or from a library. So, bye-bye to your Plan Glacial Worm. So sorry, Mike. I know you love that card.
Sure.
It's not happening.
Sorry, Muldrotha.
Maybe next game. This is just it's a good value stacks piece. It's worth talking about because advances in stacks technology, especially in the artifact realm, are interesting. What kinds of strategies does this allow us to hose now? What kind of mean rude boy wolf Aurora Borealis creatures can we stop? Now, this won't stop the wolf.
No. Maybe
nothing can.
He's a good boy.
Yeah, that's a scary wolf. But yeah, this is just good value. It's 2 mana. This is...
It's an uncommon. It's like this is going to be something that's going to be fairly rampant and available if you're dealing with metas. And here's the thing, as Commander grows and grows and the card depth grows and grows, it has become more common for the graveyard to be part of your library. For not just like some decks, but a lot of decks have some kind of recursion or some kind of way of grabbing stuff.
Sure.
So for 2 mana, being able to say, your synergy just does not work until you fix this, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I would like to have seen something that prevents lands from coming back from the graveyard, and possibly lands entering from the library. But what we really need is a much more comprehensive answer to Green Ramp, and this is a much longer conversation. Yeah. We had Confounding Conundrum. I would consider that the first true ramp hate piece that we've ever received.
Yeah.
And this is not the second one, but this is showing that, again, Stax technology is continuing to be innovated upon, and I'm excited to see what stuff we can lock down next, Mike.
We here at Staxco are constantly innovating and doing what we can to stop other people from having fun. Let's go ahead and move on to lands. We got one for you. Tyrite Sanctum. Go ahead and read this one out for me, Alex.
Yeah, you got it, Mike. So this is a utility land. Tap and add a colorless. It also has 2 activated abilities. The first one, pay 2 and tap it. Target legendary creature becomes a god in addition to its other types. Put a +1/+1 counter on it. I mean, How about the second ability? Pay 4 and tap it. Sacrifice it. Put an indestructible counter on target god. So, an indestructible counter is a ability keyword counter.
Yep.
Which means that when you put that counter onto target god, that god then becomes indestructible for as long as that counter is on it. It gains that keyword. So we do have a few like edge cases here, like, okay, if you're playing with these new gods from Kaldheim, yeah, you need these because none of the gods from this time around, and we do have a lot of older gods from Theros and Amonkhet, but a good chunk of those are indestructible. But this one allows you to make the new gods indestructible. But more than that, it allows you to make any legendary creature indestructible if you're willing to spend the mana over 2 separate turns. And that's what I really wanted to talk about is, yes, if you are trying to make something indestructible, this is a very, very slow way to do it. However, there are decks where this utility land would not be out of place.
Sure.
If your commander is sacrosanct above everything else in your deck, your commander must stay on the battlefield or else your deck collapses. And I think we all know who's guilty of making those decks. It's me. This is an option that over 2 turns, and this is very difficult to stop unless they can spot remove right away, which if you're worried about them doing that, they were probably going to do it whether or not you had this land, right? You can make a legendary creature a god, put a counter on it, and then make that god indestructible. Now, we've talked about utility lands, and there's this big stigma that you don't want to run too many of them because it messes with your color fixing. I think that we just need to say our piece here, and I just want people to acknowledge that in lower color decks, in 3-color, 2-color, and especially monocolor decks and colorless decks, the number of utility lands that you are able to run before interfering with your fixing is actually quite a bit higher than what people might say.
Oh,
and
sure.
I won't get into the raw numbers, but when you look at a utility land like this and say, oh my god, that's such an edge case, I would never play it, think about some of your decks. Think about some of your commanders that are fragile, and think about how much less fragile that'd be if, under some circumstances, you could just make them indestructible on a land.
Sure. And I mean, even with that, it doesn't say non-god legendary creature.
Mm-hmm.
So you can repeat this effect if you so chose just to give it +1. That's fine.
Yeah, you could keep pumping your god.
You could do that.
Commander if you wanted, or any god.
If you have cards that care about name a creature type whenever creature blank, or draw a card for each creature of that, things like that, well, okay, great. I want to have gods. This is just the gods deck. Well, I've got a couple of creatures that aren't gods. Well, you know what? Now they can be. I like this as a utility land. It's not blowing the doors off or anything like that.
No, this is a slow boy.
But it's cool. I kind of like that. And the idea of literally going to this land and becoming a god is thematically pretty cool. So I'm a big fan of it.
So we've gone through all of our card types and our colors, but we actually do have a few more cards to talk about.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about some of the new precon cards. Just like 2020 was the year of Commander, we got precons in pretty much every set. It looks like that's what's going to happen this year too.
Yep.
We got 2 new precons. We're not really going to go into them. We're not going to do the whole deck list.
No.
We're just going to talk about a couple of the cards from them that we found interesting.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and start here. How about Pact of the Serpent? Mike?
Yeah, because that's actually what I was thinking about when I was mentioning that with Tyrite Sanctum. So this is a 1 generic black sorcery. Choose a creature type. Target player draws X cards and loses X life, where X is the number of creatures they control of the chosen type. This is a pretty good tribal synergy. It's not... I mean, for 3 mana total to hopefully draw 3 cards for 3 life, if that's kind of like the low-end spectrum of what you're looking for, I'm fine with that. The fact that this can pop off and be huge, and if you need to help somebody running a tribal deck to find an answer for somebody else who's the arch enemy, this is a cool spell, Alex. I like it a lot.
Absolutely, Mike. This is just an instant staple in your tribal deck, in your black tribal deck, just because you're able to draw an arbitrary number of cards. But it also has other uses, political uses. If you see another tribal deck, or if you see a token deck, you are able to go ahead and donate some cards to them and get a life loss trigger. But you can also use this to hose. If somebody makes an arbitrarily large number of tokens, for example, to win the game, you can blow them out without board wiping them.
I make infinite tokens. Okay, I would like you to draw infinite cards and lose infinite life.
Womp womp.
It's a very cool card. I like this one a lot.
That's the thing about black is it's so interesting just how many black cards in particular have target player instead of you. And I feel like for the most part, that's a conscious design decision used to see if you can't hose other players with the effects that you're using on yourself. But the practical upshot of that is that there's a lot of black cards that are just incidentally extremely political.
Would you agree with me that blue is the most adaptable of the colors? Like it works with so many different things.
Well, what do you mean by adaptable?
Well, just when we're talking about the fact that blue is now I can bounce, exile, destroy, and counter. It does all the draw. It makes tokens. It goes in so many different areas. So I think it's the most adaptable color.
So you're saying it's the most versatile color? Yes. It does the most things. Yeah. Yeah. I might agree with that.
I think black is, like you said, I think it's the most political. I think it has the most amount of effects written on the card without necessarily having to synergize with 1,000 other things. But just the cards themselves. It is the color that is most likely to... We're going to talk about this as a team. We're going to talk about this collectively and then make a decision. Which I guess makes sense, seeing as that black does a whole lot of sacrificing effects. It does a whole lot of do this benefit with this downside and being able to split it. I don't know. I like cards like this, like Pact of the Serpent, that are strong in the right circumstances, but can be used in a variety of ways politically.
What if you combine this card with Hull Preacher?
No. Stop doing that, Alex.
So then they would draw 0 cards and lose.
Moving
X
on
life,
to one of our next cards.
X treasure tokens.
We're going to talk about Spectral Deluge. This is a blue sorcery for 4 generic and 2 blue. Return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control. Okay, so that kind of effect exists in some ways. The thing that's cool about this is that it also has Foretell for 1 generic and 2 blue. Alex, this is nuts!
Yeah. The way that Foretell enables different strategies is interesting, but one of the most interesting ones that I've found so far, and we talked about this earlier with the whiteboard wipe, is Wrath effects.
Yeah.
The idea that you can set up a Wrath effect, which you can then actually cast at your leisure, and it has to be on one of your turns, it's a sorcery, but on a later turn for a steep discount for 1 blue on your next turn, or on any subsequent turn, maybe when you have some more islands, who knows, you can plan ahead. It allows a discount, it allows you to do the rattlesnake effect. There are just... Foretell on a board wipe is a remarkable addition. And I think just like before, just like our last whiteboard wipe that we talked about at the beginning of the episode, if you are planning to hardcast this spell most of the time, don't run it.
Right.
This is the spell that you foretell.
So 6 mana for a sorcery speed, bounce creature to their owner's hand, conditional. It's not great. It's not bad, but it's not great. I'm really going to be bummed out, and we'll talk about this at the end of the episode. We're going to talk about it on our next card even. I'm really bummed out that Foretell is probably going to be something that's only in this kind of set. I like this mechanic a lot. I want this to stick around. And it makes cards that I wouldn't find interesting.
Right.
And that's, I will give Magic a whole lot. I will give Magic and I'll give Wizards a whole lot of crud about, just give me some creative stuff. Just work with me. This is a really cool mechanic, and I'll save the rest of my thoughts for later. Let's talk about another Foretell card, Alex.
Absolutely, Mike. This is a very interesting card
that
I'm very excited to see. Tales of the Ancestors. 3 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player with fewer cards in hand than the player with the most cards in hand draws cards equal to the difference with Foretell for 1 and a blue. So we see this effect in white a lot, where we see
the balance
either
effects.
We're bringing down everybody down to our level, or we're bringing everyone below our level up to our level. And that's definitely what we're seeing here. So everyone who doesn't have the most cards in hand is going to be drawing at least 1 card, and perhaps quite a few cards, especially since as you use this card with Foretell, you can prepare for this effect by dumping your entire hand.
Yeah.
And then refilling your entire hand for 2 mana, while also having that nice group hug effect where you're making everybody else draw a bunch of cards.
Everybody
which
but
I
one.
think is... Yeah. Well, that player doesn't need this effect, so that just works out perfect.
No, and that's great. So I'd say that drawing cards is one of the important things that you want to do in Magic. I don't know.
It's up there.
Call me crazy.
You're crazy.
But you think about some of the cards that are scary, like Necropotence. All right, I'm going to pay 15 life and get 15 cards. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to pay 2 mana, and so is everybody else. Like... I know that it's not an equal thing, but I love this as a group hug card.
Oh yeah.
And I like it a lot as just anything where you have triggers for people drawing cards, anything where, hey, I just want to even things out or just give people a chance to take out something that's a threat. Oh, I don't have the answer. Well, do you have it in your deck? Yeah. Okay. Well, how many cards you got? Okay. You draw 4, you draw 5, I'll draw 3. I love those effects.
Yeah.
And this is a very cool one. Good job, Tales of the Ancestors. Okay, so for our Judges Corner this week, we're going to talk about the new mechanics to this set. We're going to go over Boast real quickly. We talked about it a little bit before, but Boast has mana ability attached to a creature and says, activate this ability only if this creature attacked this turn and only once each turn. So it has to be that particular creature, and it also has to be something where you can only do it once. So extra combats, things along those lines, doesn't really make a difference. Only activating it once this turn, on the turn that it attacked. It's real cool. I like it, giving mana sinks into abilities on cards that are encouraging attacking. Hooray aggro, hooray doing cool things with different creatures. That's enough of that. I want to talk about Foretell. I love Foretell. You know what, Alex? Because is there anything that's been like this? I guess Morph, kind of. This feels very new to me, and again, I'm very bummed out because it feels like it's just going to go away in the future.
Yeah, Mike, this card is quite similar to Morph in many ways, but from Mark Rosewater's account, who is the lead designer for Magic, he says that this is a top-down mechanic, which means that he's designed it for flavor first and then made the mechanics fit to the flavor. And he says he got this from the Star Wars trading card game. I don't think he got it from Star Wars Destiny because that one's too new. But if there was an older version of that game, I think that's where he got it from. All right, so Foretell is a new keyword ability from Kaldheim. And as we said earlier, the reminder text says, Foretell cost. During your turn, you may pay 2 and exile this card from your hand face down. Cast it on a later turn for its Foretell cost. So it's kind of like a mix between Morph and Suspend. On your turn, you can pay 2 as a special action and put this card face down in exile. And then on a later turn, not the same turn, you may cast it with timing restrictions intact. So if you're foretelling a sorcery or a creature or an artifact or enchantment, you can only then cast that on your next turn. But if you foretell an instant spell, then you can then cast it on the next turn, even if it's not your turn.
And it's actually something I'm pretty excited about. So my whole thing was I love the memes of Foretell being a you activated my trap card just constantly kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't want to play, I think, any of these things face down. I think I want to foretell it just like, oh, look, it's on the wrong side. Oh, look, everybody can see it. Because the political value of just, oh, well, just know if you pop off with a whole lot of tokens, they're going to turn into this thing. I'm just saying. Oh, just know that if you make a whole lot of creatures or something scary, I'm going to wipe the board. And
yeah,
I think that's part of why I like this set so much. Like we're specifying on the cards that are, about what we are as a podcast. But there's a couple like In Search of Greatness is a cool one, Battle Mammoth, Maskwood Nexus. There's this set, how do I phrase this? The set feels ambitious in trying to do something different without breaking the game in doing so.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of that. Like I'm actually, I didn't even talk about the Squirrel Legend. Like this is kind of a cool set. I'm a big fan.
Yeah. There are definitely a lot of super cool cards in this set that we just are not talking about. And we said this at the beginning, just because everyone else is talking about those cards already.
Yeah.
And if you want to hear about them, you can listen to the podcast that we like to listen to. The Command Zone. Our good friend Dana over at CMDR Central is going to do a set review, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The EDH Rec podcast. There's a lot of different podcasts that are going to do the big set overview where they talk about all the commanders and all the fun new spells. And it may have some overlap with the cards that we talked about. But the cards that we're talking about here are the cards that you and I care about specifically. The political cards. That's what this podcast is all about.
Bring this to the table and just watch how the game changes because...
Right.
Well, what's that do for everybody? Oh, wow. I'm going to draw 3 and he's going to draw 4. Oh, well, he's not going to draw any. And she's going to draw 10. Oh my gosh. Wow. That's like, yeah, it's a cool set. I'm a big fan of it. All right, Alex. I mean, just like you, I'm really excited for this set. I like what they're doing. White still continues to need some help, and I'm sure it's coming any day now, Alex. Any day now. But thanks for listening, everyone. Alex, where can people find you on socials?
Absolutely. You can catch me on Twitter at Lappermedic, Lapper Medic, and you can email me if you have any judge questions, although usually Twitter's going to be faster. Mm-hmm. Catch me at alex@edhrec.com. And
if you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe and rate the podcast. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can follow us on Twitter at EDH_social or email us at thesocialcontractedh@gmail.com. We'll talk to you soon, and man, it's going to be a fun set.